Okay, so we're live. Hooray. So, Paul, I don't know you barely, really at all. I just saw some wonderful posts, really delicious posts that you put on Soul Leadership. So, can you tell us like a little bit about yourself?
Sure. There's 73 years of it, so I'll try to condense it. I have a ministry background. Went to did undergraduate in philosophy and biblical literature. Did a master's of divinity, and then spent 16 years in denominational administration,
Oh,
and had a crash and burn from work addiction. You know, churches don't want to hire drug addicts, but they're happy to hire work addicts because we
yeah.
work hard.
Yeah.
Out of that, on my own recovery, I went back to a local church, a large local church, and in doing my own recovery, I helped start a 12-step program. This is long before the others were come around, but we called it New Hope for Recovery. And I found myself with 125 people on a Thursday night, suddenly coming to find New Hope for Recovery. And fortunately, I had some support, some good 12-step people. They mentored me in the process because I was still coming from a ministry model.
Yeah.
And as I met with people, I found myself struggling to help them. They would often talk about how guilty they felt, and I knew that word. And then they would tell me what their guilt was about, and it was about things that had happened to them, not living up to parents' expectations, not knowing something bad was going to happen before it happened, even feeling guilty for the abuse they experienced. And I realized they were using the wrong term. And these were pretty highly churched people. And it struck me, they're really using the word guilt, but they mean shame.
Yeah.
And I really got curious because I really had no theological understanding of shame. It was kind of a minor issue.
Wow.
I remember a day that someone left my office and I was very frustrated myself. And I went over to my computer, and in those days, the word search programs in scripture were mostly defaulted to the King James Version, which I grew up with, but I wasn't
Yeah.
reading. But I put the word guilt in, and I was shocked. It only came up 192 times in the Old and New Testament combined.
Yeah.
When you put the word shame and disgrace in, it's many more times than that. Many more times than that.
Ah,
And I realized that shame is much more prevalent than just where the word appears.
yes.
But it was kind of a transparent experience to me. I mean, I knew it personally. If you had guilt, I had 5 steps to get you out of guilt, Roman road or whatever. But if you had shame, I didn't really have much of a model to help you with.
Wow.
Long story short, from that point, I went to a seminary and I did a doctor of ministry. And my research was about internalized shame. Today, I would work with it, internalized shame and internalized trauma.
Yeah.
They are hand in hand.
Yes.
And trauma is one of the most unrecognized experiences and unaddressed experiences in most churches.
Yes.
And so I did my doctor of ministry. I came back to Kansas City where I was working previously. And I worked for a Christian counseling center. And I did pastoral care mostly, but I met with people and I would talk about the shame and they go, aha, yes, I see it. Well, that makes all kinds of sense. Yes. But then they come back the next month or whatever. And it's like same stuckness.
Yes.
And I was invited by that group as a kind of a guinea pig to go through an experiential process with another company. And they were trying to form a joint venture. And so I went and dragged my wife along. And they weren't talking about shame. But I watched as people took little bitty steps of risk and were not shamed and they were successful. Over time, they significantly dealt with shame, even though it wasn't on the table. And then I got the light bulb moment. We acquire shame, not intellectually, we acquire it experientially. And so out of that, we spent a year working with them, and we created another model for them. And then after a year, they didn't really want to continue that. And at that point, my boss told me that, who's a friend of mine, said, managed care is taking over and we're going to be out of business in a year. So here's your choices. You can stay with us and not have a job and do no seminars, or you can quit and do seminars. And I would suggest you do seminars. And so my wife and I, and her job was eliminated where she was at about the same time. So we're sitting around a kitchen table saying, if not now, when? If not us, who?
That's awesome.
And so we launched 25 years ago an organization now called Heart Connection Seminars. And we've been doing a core seminar called Breakthrough for these 25 years. We've had about 5,000 people go through. And so I work as a spiritual director for many of those people. And I'm a lead trainer for the Breakthrough Seminars with my wife. My wife's a clinical social worker. And these days, it's nice because I have an executive director who deals with all the logistics, and I just kind of show up with a microphone, and it's a lot easier.
Nice job.
Yeah, yeah. The other thing I've done is obviously no seminar, how powerful it is, deals with every issue we have. And so the past 4 years, I've been working in training in a process that's simply called focusing. I don't know if you've ever heard of focusing or not, but there's a bio-spiritual form of focusing, and there's an inner relationship form of focusing, pretty much the same, just a few dynamics different. But the point of focusing is, how do I get in touch with my body? How do I get in touch with the implicit wisdom that's internal to me that we've lost track of? How do I deal with the inner critics that come on? I always ask people, do you have an inner critic? And I always know the answer, because
Right.
I don't know anybody who doesn't have one.
Right.
And in spirituality terms, I sometimes say to people, it's really hard to hear the still small voice if you've got all these other voices yelling at you all the time. Yeah. And the task is, how do I find wisdom rather than settling for cunning? Cunning wants to win. Cunning will rarely ever ask you to take something that's obviously foolish and do it. Wisdom sometimes invites you to do some of the most foolish things that you can imagine. Yeah. And yet, I'm going to choose wisdom whenever I can. And so that's who I am.
It's awesome. I'm loving seeing your face and your expressions and your beingness, and the many variations of cute smile you have.
Thank you.
Like, I saw your picture on your Facebook page. I'm just like, I need to talk to this guy. Look at that face. There's so much beauty and playfulness going on.
Well, thank you. Thank you. As a little private side note, when we first started talking about getting together, I was actually in the middle of a prostate cancer treatment plan.
Ah.
And so I was going through radiation at that time. So the cancellations were okay with me.
Yes. Thank you. It worked. Thanks for being so flexible. And I guess it worked out for you too, huh?
It did. And I'm doing well. I've got good energy, and I'm doing well. I'm launching some new projects. So
wonderful. Good. So how has this process been for you? I mean, you've helped so many people at this point with really going deeper, being able to be with ourselves and others, being able to do things in life that we couldn't do. You know, I'm sure you've helped untold numbers of people. What have you noticed for yourself in this process?
Well, a long time ago, I began to have contemplative practices. I've discovered the Eastern Orthodox Jesus prayer. use that, and then centering prayer. And then I've used John Mayne's Maranatha prayer. And so I've developed a number of those. And I've attributed a lot of my ability to be with people in their pain, in their stories, coming from a centered place. These days, I would also say that I have worked through a lot of the issues in my life so that I am able to be, the term I use is self in presence, to be present with people and their pain. Henry Nouwen's book, Wounded Healer, was very, very insightful to me. And those kind of experiences. But I've always had kind of an aptitude, I guess, for being with people and hearing their stories and being somewhat of an empathetic presence when I'm not caught up in my own stuff.
Yes. I found in my practice, in working with others in their practice, that we call it matching pictures. Like everything, there's always a pattern that is like, oh, that I've been there. My mother was like that. This hooks me in some way, and it's so fascinating to watch those layers as we show up with other people. We have to deal with ourselves, and then the mirror gets cleaner and cleaner and cleaner.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So
fortunately, I also have a group of people who volunteer in the ministry, who we have a very, very close camaraderie, vulnerability, authenticity, to be with each other and to be supportive of each other, and to debrief as we need to. And so it's a community effect. We have I'm not sure, about 5,000 people have gone through. Not all of them have stayed close connected, but we have a private Facebook group with a lot of alumni on there. And it's a very raw, real place of people sharing pain, people's pain.
Nice. It's so beautiful. So how has this affected? So we've talked a little bit about you. You said self in presence. Is that what you said?
I use self in presence. Self in presence to me is where I can be with the issues that are coming up, and I can have them, but they don't necessarily have me. Yeah. For example, some people would say, I'm angry, I'm hurt, I'm disappointed. That language implies that feeling is as big or bigger than they are. It's overwhelmed them. It's as if the feeling is now driving the car and they're in the back seat.
Yes, I use that sometimes.
The problem is that when the car wrecks, they're the ones that are going to have to clean up the mess.
Yes.
So one of the suggestions is always have a pause. Without a pause, we just react. Yeah. Across the years, I've never seen in any setting, relationship, work, church, where reactions were helpful. Responses can be very helpful, but reactions are just usually toxic. They just create reactions. Yeah. And so I would work with myself and other people to suggest a word change, which sounds kind of simple, but to say, instead of saying, I am angry, to say, something in me feels angry. I'm not denying it. Denial doesn't work. Right. But suddenly it's not all of me. Yeah. And if I can be with it with curiosity, it might inform me what it's upset about or what it's worried about. The same way with inner critics. And we're talking about leadership. Which leader doesn't have an inner critic? I mean, yeah. So I'll ask you, when you were probably 12, 13, 14 years old, you probably at one time or another wanted to go to a party, wanted to meet with some friends, and your parents didn't like the idea and they said, no, you can't go.
Oh, yeah.
And typically people say, you don't trust me. You think I'm a little kid. You hate me. At that moment, we're quite sure that they are critics, but probably their motivation was to protect you.
Mm.
What if what we call inner critics are things in us, awareness is in us. I use the word parts, not a concrete part, but a part that says,
Right.
I'm worried for you. I'm anxious for you.
Yes.
Instead of shoving it away, something in me feels worried and critical.
Yeah.
I can be curious, and our bodies have implicit knowing in them.
Mm-hmm.
Our bodies want to forward our life. Our body has an intuitive knowing what's forwarding our life. We have the privilege now of having a bonus grandbaby who's now 19 months old.
Oh, wow.
And it's been so fun to watch him 1 or 2 days a week. And I remember when he was just a few months old, he began to want to turn over, but he had both arms stretched out at the same time. Well, that was impossible.
Right.
The next week he came and he wanted to turn, but he tucked an arm. Nobody taught him that. It was an implicit, intuitive knowing.
Yes.
And for me, trauma is anything that happens that our bodies wasn't expecting to happen, or something didn't happen that our body was expecting to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And the process, the implicit process at some level gets stopped. It gets frozen. And the next thing that happens is really the key issue. Are there adequate resources at the time to help unfreeze that, or there are lack of adequate resources? So if we've had children, we've taken them to a park like you're in right now, and they play and they fall down and scrape a knee. If they come to the caretaker, the parents, and the caretaker appropriately takes care of them, kisses the boo-boo, they go out and play. No big deal. Trauma, hurt, but then resources, it unfreezes. Yeah. Another kid does the same thing, and they come to the caregiver, and the caregiver isn't adequate. The caregiver says, what are you crying for? Big boys don't cry. Get out there and play. They will go back out and play, but now they're going to play cautiously. Mm. So the stoppage didn't really get dissolved.
Yes.
And it will stay there until we can come back to it later in life with self-compassion and be adequate resources for ourselves.
I love that.
We've all been in settings where we're with people we know, committee meetings or social meetings, and something happens, and we're not even sure what it is, but all of a sudden something's throwing a temper tantrum like they're a 5-year-old. Mm-hmm. When we have a frozen part of ourselves, we will often go back to the same coping skills we had at the time of the stoppage.
Yeah, it's not pretty.
It blocks our spirituality. It blocks our relationships. It certainly blocks our ability to be leaders.
Yes, absolutely. So in all the work you've done, is this all for Christian audiences, or does anybody come? How's that work?
When we started 25 years ago, probably the majority of our audience was from churches. We kind of had I had the naive assumption that people would come, they would go back to church, and the church would mentor them and help them. The problem was they went back wanting more authenticity and vulnerability, and frankly, it scared other people.
Yeah.
And so some would just go back to the old model, or some would leave.
Yeah.
And across the years, we have changed audiences. I used to be able to say something about Nicodemus, for example, and everybody was like, oh yeah, Nicodemus. And now it's like, Nicodemus, who is that?
Yes.
So we have shifted language across the years. We've had Sikhs, We've had people of various kinds of backgrounds. The issue most people come in with is feeling like I'm stuck. I'm repeating the old patterns. I've lost myself. I hear that all the time. I've lost myself. And we've had a lot of couples come. The name of the group is Heart Connection. Sometimes I get a question whether it's a marriage service or a dating service, and that's not that. But I do tell couples, if you come together, you'll work separately. I learned a long time ago that we all hear that marriage is at least a 50-50 proposition. What they don't tell us is it's multiplication, not addition. So half and half equals 25% relationship.
Nice.
And a lot of the relationship issues are really the smokescreen issues that are really our own issues that we haven't worked through.
Yeah.
And so we do have a marriage seminar that we encourage people to go to. But when you come through as an individual. Nice. Again, I'm convinced that a family can change if one person will do their own work.
Yes.
Doesn't have to. Can't force it. But if nobody changes, nothing changes.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, that's one of the questions I wanted to ask. Besides your own personal experience, how have your relationships changed over doing this work?
Well, I would say that I started off as a pretty heady guy. On the Enneagram world, I'm a 5. I'm an investigator. I like to know all the things, how it all fits together. Over time, I have gotten much more vulnerable and more authentic. Coming through ministerial training, there was always a desire for an emotional component, but the reality was discipleship was intellectual cognitive process. And I learned early on it doesn't work very well. You can get smarter and smarter about something, but your life doesn't really change. Your values don't change. Your wounds don't change. And so as I've gone through, there's nobody been through breakthrough more times than I have across these years. And in each training, I find something in my own self that there's a little piece of awareness there.
Yeah.
And so I try to keep growing and keep on the cutting edge of that. And again, I have some loving people around me who are a very close community who can call me when I'm in my stuff.
Yeah. Beautiful. So this kind of leads to another question, which is, your audience has shifted. Has your relationship with Christianity, with church, with doctrine, has that shifted as well? Or is that, what's going on with that?
Yeah, it's shifted quite a bit. My background was pretty fundamentalist. I never did fit there well because I asked too many questions. But I was trained in that. And I pastored 2 small churches for a while, but I really wasn't a very successful pastor. And I think God, spirituality, the unknowable helped me fail because I learned more about myself in failing than I would ever learn if I'd been, quote, successful.
Yeah.
And in fact, one of the churches I was pastoring, I was there, a short time really. And I told another pastor, I don't think my church can handle much more health. They kind of need to be beat up once in a while. And I just don't know how to really beat people up. So I shifted a long time ago. It's been a gradual shift. If I were to describe myself today, I would say I'm a panentheist.
Yeah.
Kind of a category for me.
Yeah.
So I don't read scripture literally anymore. I think that Jesus was an amazing mystic and wisdom teacher, and as others have been. And so my spirituality has broadened considerably. And yet I in our seminars, we had people who come in very fundamentalist. We had people come in with no background whatsoever and very anti anything to do with church or religion. And so I have changed my languaging of some of the illustrations I use over the time to kind of do a little bit of both,
Mm-hmm.
kind of help both parties to feel comfortable in that.
Yeah, that's great.
My wife years ago, my wife was interviewed for a counseling position. She's a clinical therapist in a large church of my denomination, and the pastor was obviously less than excited about having a female counselor.
Mm.
And so one of his first questions was, "Well, you have a couple come to you, and they're really concerned about original sin. What would you say?" And she looked at him and she said, "In all my years of counseling, I've never had a couple come to me and say, our marriage is on the rocks because we don't agree on original sin."
Seriously.
That was the end of the interview.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, that was it.
Well, it's just the truth. Come on.
Yeah, it's like, this doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. So when you went back for your doctorate, you saw a need to inquire into shame,
Yes,
and you went to seminary,
yes,
and you found some things in your inquiry that were useful and are still useful.
yes.
How did that happen?
Well, backing up, my wife was on staff at a psych hospital here in Kansas City, and they had a speaker series, and they had a nice dinner, and they wanted a crowd, and so they invited all the spouses. and the speaker was named Donald Nathanson. Don Nathanson was a savant about shame. He understood it psychologically, he understood it socially, he understood it spiritually. He understood it in a way I had never, and I had curiosity before that, but this was like just drinking out of a fire hose. Yeah. And so it confirmed all of my suspicions. And so I was also reading scripture through shame eyes, and began to buy some books about the shame culture that Jesus was born in and was raised in, the Middle Eastern culture, much more shame-oriented culture. Mm-hmm. And so my dissertation, by the way, a little source of pride here, it was a distinguished dissertation, the first distinguished dissertation the seminary had awarded. So that was a nice little prize.
Yes.
But it was a correlation among three factors. I had an instrument that measured degree of internalized shame. I had an instrument that measured degree of codependency. And I had an instrument that measured degree of spiritual well-being. And so the natural correlation would be the more shame, the more codependency, the less spiritual well-being.
Yeah.
And so what I was doing with the support group was working on the codependency piece.
Interesting.
And it was helping people with shame and spiritual well-being. And so my research was around, well, what if we work on the shame piece? And so I took people through some processes, did some other work, and we found out that, the research suggested that you work on the shame, you increase the spiritual formation, spirituality, and you decrease the codependency.
Yes.
So I worked with some of the work with Don Nathanson's mentor was a man named Sylvan Tompkins. Sylvan was a psychologist, a researcher, who came up with the concept that shame is an innate affect, that each child is born with several innate affects. Anger, teach a child how to be angry. Smiling, interest. A child can be very interested in something. Excitement, children's eyes can go wide open. There's another one, he was labeled dismell. So when you put something, the baby doesn't smell right, it closes its nose. You don't have to teach it. You give it some peas and it goes, it doesn't like it. And he said, when you have a child that is excited about an object, a toy, and you suddenly take it away, you'll either see them go to anger or you'll see them turn in on themselves, eyes down. And he was suggesting that is the beginning of an innate effect of a diminished sense of self. Which, when you think about it, throws theology, most Western theology, for a curve, because shame precedes guilt. You have to know something's wrong to have any guilt feelings.
Yeah.
But you don't have to know things wrong to have shame feelings.
Right.
Now, I link them. If I do something I know is wrong and I have some shame about it, I might be motivated to apologize, make restitution. If I do something wrong and have no shame about it whatsoever, I'm going to dismiss it, blow it off, rationalize it. And I always joke about, I've never seen anybody who's speeding realize they were going too fast, have to turn themselves into a police officer to get it off their chest.
Me neither.
But if a little red light comes on behind, and suddenly the shame comes in the car. And just like we can have guilt with or without shame, we can have shame even after we've dealt with the guilt.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's the real problem.
Yeah. And the internalization of shame is the deep feeling of I am not blank enough. Mm-hmm. I'm not handsome enough, pretty enough, smart enough, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
The paradox of shame is that if you have a lot of shame and I sense that you have low self-esteem or whatever, I may try to help you and kind of build you up. And the intuitive thing is you're going to like that. But with enough shame, you don't like it at all. You pull back from it because they're going to see too much. Then they'll leave.
Yeah.
And then the person tries again, and then they leave. And it's like, well, see, I knew they wouldn't stay.
Right.
It becomes self-reinforcing.
It really does trip us.
The other paradox is that guiltless is good. Shameless is not good at all. If you have someone who has no capacity for shame, they can hurt you and laugh at the same time. They're a sociopath.
They don't have, or it was broken, this innate turning within that you talked about.
Yeah, it could be so damaged, or it could be that some people are born with no capacity for shame. It's just that it's a defect of birth. Healthy spirituality requires some level of healthy shame. It allows me to be not -God, perfect, and be acceptable with my imperfections. If I have to be perfect enough for God, how do I ever get there? Mm-hmm. Can I accept the acceptance that I have? If I can't accept the acceptance within my brokenness, I can never accept the acceptance I have.
I have to sit with this.
Okay.
I've been grokking what you said in, from my own perspective, and it's all sat, and I just wonder about this part. I'm not saying you're right or wrong or anything. I'm just like, I have to sit with this.
Yeah.
And I wonder, because guilt is about the doing.
Guilt is about doing wrong. Shame is about being wrong.
Right. And like, that's the real issue of behavior.
Absolutely.
So could it be our language is off?
Yeah.
Could it be that the lack of guilt is really concerning for society and for our spiritual development? soul
Yes,
development.
absolutely, absolutely.
Um,
We can laugh guilt. Now, guilt. I think in my theology, I guilt is as kind of a subset of shame. It's shame about doing something wrong.
right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Yeah. So I just have to sit with that because I don't know, it's not important what I think, but I put shame under what I call invalidation, which is living
Yes.
in lie, which is
Yes.
living in not truth
Right.
spiritually.
Yes.
Um, and like there's no amount of truth that's bad. Right. So like then it has me think, I just have to play with it about if if guilt really is the issue. Um, because because if I go around chopping people's heads off,
Yeah.
like that's not healthy for
Right.
anyone.
No. No.
Um, so
If I have remorse about it, okay, that I can have a belief system that causes me to chop people's heads off under some religious,
right, or
warrior kind
holy
of
war or
model.
something.
But if I have no remorse about it, then I'm not shamed about it,
It's yeah,
and I probably
exactly.
have no. The other paradox is that there are people who have significant shame that will drive them to the gutter. They will
Yeah,
throw their lives away,
totally.
and the more you try to help them, the more painful it is for them.
Yes,
But the same shame can drive somebody else to the heights of success.
yes.
I'm not
On the
enough
outside. On the outside.
on the outside. I'm not enough. I'm not enough. I got to have more. I got to have more. I got to have more.
Yes,
It looks very different,
yes,
but I would suggest it's pretty much the same thing.
yes. And it's so painful in there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And in the middle is a place of healthy brokenness that I don't have to be perfect to be acceptable. I can, with my imperfection, I want to work on my imperfection, not excuse, but I
Right.
don't have to be perfect enough to be acceptable, to be loved.
Yes. I can just be human because perfection's for gods, as Frank Herbert
Yeah,
says.
yeah, yeah. Now, unfortunately, I ask people all the time. I've asked them for 25 years. Not so much these days because I have a different audience, but have you ever heard sermons about shame? No,
No.
no.
No. Although Brene Brown's doing a good job.
Brene Brown's doing a good job. She's opened up a lot of vocabulary about it.
Yeah.
One of my concerns, not about Brene particularly, but one of my concerns about people who teach about shame but don't do it with an experiential component is that you can almost inoculate people against doing more work because I
Mm-hmm.
feel like, well, I understand that. I've done that. That's not, I got all that.
Right.
But until they've done some experiential work with it, it's not really, it can be bypassed.
Yes, like all the other good things, right?
Exactly.
Oh, I'm already love. I'm already God. I'm already that's nice.
Yeah. Yeah. And I learned early on that meditation can be a place of spiritual bypass.
Mm.
I can move down into a single pointed place of peace, but I move past all the stirring in my soul to get there. And I feel great, but I've never really dealt with my issues.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, is a problem with some meditation teachers because their humanity is sometimes shows itself in ways that isn't very complimentary.
Yes.
And the pastors. I mean,
Yeah.
I know a lot of pastors.
Yeah.
Most of the pastors I know would say, I want to be the safest place in the world for people to come in and just strip down naked emotionally and just be as vulnerable as they can be. But I'm not going to do that.
Yes.
I can't do that.
Yes. And thinking they are the safest place, but it's a lie.
It's a lie. Yeah, it's a lie.
Yeah. Because
Yeah.
it's only when I do it that I can be with you.
And codependency is rampant in the church.
Yes. It runs on it.
Yeah, really is. It's just, and if you don't know it, if you don't see it, you just get caught up in it, and it feels like the good thing.
Right. Right. We just bring those habits that we learned in our family or wherever we learned them to the church
Correct.
too. And then that hooks up. It's like, okay, I fit here
Yeah.
if I do this and be that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you haven't talked very much about codependency. Do you want to say anything about that?
Well, I worked with codependency a long time in the 12 support group, 12 steps group, and it's a very dangerous experience. I mean, it's taught in the church, it's taught in families. Um, the 3-step process of dealing with codependency is talk about what you're not supposed to talk about, feel what you're not supposed to feel, and trust somebody and break the rules. I mean, nobody gets past codependency without breaking those codependent rules.
Yeah.
And the more I am present with myself in presence, where I can be with my feelings, I can be with my thoughts, they don't have me, I will be less codependent because I'll be tapping more into wisdom
Yes.
rather than trying to be cunning, trying to avoid confrontation, trying to avoid rocking the boat, and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. This 12-step thing that you did, I'm not sure what the focus was. Usually it's like alcohol or codep or
Yeah.
food or whatever. Was there
Well,
a focus?
we decided early on not to be in competition with any issue-specific group. And so we called it New Hope for Recovery, a place for people whose life's not working well.
Nice.
So the people showed up.
Right.
So we had about 125 people on a Thursday night. It had to be Thursday night because that was a night there was nothing else going on. Because you're not going to come up to a place and go to a class on Sunday of codependency.
Right.
And fortunately, we had some very good people to have a children's component as well.
Nice.
We had about 50 or 60 children
Wow.
in that process. And I ran that for 5 years, and I moved on and turned it over to a staff member, and he kept it going for a while
That was within one church.
with one church. Now,
That must have been a big church.
I went about 2,000, 2,500 attending. However, most of the people who came were not from our church.
Ah.
Yes. They came from other churches. In fact, the people who came from our church, they would be there for a little bit. They'd kind of pull me aside and say, "Can I talk to you?" I said, "Sure." Do they over there know what you're doing over here? And I said, "Well, yes, but they don't really understand it, but they like the results."
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So this brings me back to, you went to seminary to take the next steps, and the next steps formed. What about the seminary part was helpful?
Not a lot.
Okay. It gave you structure.
No, now the master's degree, the DMin program is different, but the master's degree was pretty much standard, what you would expect.
Yeah.
The doctor of ministry program, although the seminary was more conservative than I realized at the time, it really gave me a latitude of a lot of research and questions and a whole different audience to talk to. And it was a Methodist seminary, or a Methodist related seminary. So it was a broader audience than I had.
Yes.
And that allowed me to have a lot more, open my box up to more thoughts and more.
Right.
So I know that mystic is kind of your bag here.
It's my bag.
So I'll share a little mystic piece here.
Great.
So I did I had my crash and burn. I'd spent 16 years in denomination administration, and I was tired of that. I wasn't satisfied there. I had a chartered life underwriter degree and a chartered financial consultant degree. And so I had a lot of insurance contacts, and I could have made a lot of money. So I had a vocational dilemma. And for some strange reason, the organization asked me to go to Haiti for 5 days.
Wow.
To meet with pastors and begin to talk about basic pension concepts. Now, I love your laugh. It was like, how ludicrous could this be?
In Haiti.
In Haiti, the 5 days was required because they wouldn't let you out of the country within 5 days. They wanted money. So I went, and I'm in this dilemma, and I meet with the pastors, and we talk a few things, whatever, but I had a lot of time on myself. I was in a missionary's home. They were on furlough. I was looking out the window watching people wash clothes in a stream and cook over charcoal. And I was also watching WGN Cubs on the TV. And the the dissonance of that was just remarkable. It was shocking. And so I spent the week on a retreat trying to figure out my calling. Where am I going to go? And as I went through that, I got to the end of the week, and it was a very deep knowing that I was not to go to the insurance. I was not to stay with the denomination. I was to find a place in some kind of ministry capacity. And I felt really good about that. Mm-hmm. And I went to the airport, and in the airport, there was a young man who was obviously inebriated and carrying around rum to go back to the United States. And when I sat there, I had this internal voice knowing he's going to be your seatmate. Just be calm. I said, okay, whatever. And he was. And he fell asleep pretty quickly. He was pretty obnoxious at first, and people didn't like it, but I was there. Mm-hmm. And so a wide-bodied plane, packed to the gills. We were running late. We got into Miami way after our flights had gone. And I just waited for him to get off. And I'm walking down the aisle, and I hear a stewardess talking to a young man who's seated there. We have a wheelchair here, but there's nobody to push it. Okay, here I am. He was a college student on his way home, and he had left all his cash with the missionaries he had left in Haiti, thinking he's just going to go home and no problem. Had no cash, no money. And so I pushed him. We got our luggage. He pushed the luggage cart. I pushed him. The customs person said, just go on through.
I can't deal with this.
So we got to the line to be about staying overnight. And again, there was this, I didn't know the story yet. And I thought, okay, this sounds really strange to talk to a guy about where's he staying tonight. And I thought, okay, I'm going to do it. So I said, I'm on a company credit card. You obviously need help. Can I help you? He said, yeah, I don't have any money at all. I gave it away. I said, okay, we'll go to a hotel. If it's okay, we'll get a room. I can justify the credit card. I'll help you get to the airport in the morning. And it was like lifesaver for him.
Yeah.
So I'm rolling, So I get home, and I don't know what to do with all this exactly. A week goes by, and I'm having devotions in the morning, and I come downstairs, and halfway down the stairs, it's that inner knowing the pastor of this church is going to ask you to join the staff of this church. And I told my wife, and she looked at me and she said, what in the world for? What would you do? Well, I've been acting business manager, but they just hired a business manager. And so a couple of weeks went by, and the pastor met me before the service, and he said, I need to talk to you after the service. I got some questions about the finances. I said, okay, no problem. So I told my wife, I said, this is the day, it's going to happen. You go home, take the kids home, I'll call you. She said, yeah, sure, okay. So we talked about a few items. Then he turned and looked out the window for a long time. And he said, this does not make any sense. But I felt for a long time, I need to ask you to join church staff. But I know that's silly because you're headed to be the director of the pensions program for the denomination. Mm. And I have no idea what you would do, but I had to ask you. And his name was Paul. That's mine. I said, well, Paul, I've known that for a couple of weeks. So, and then he was blown away. So we said, let's let this settle for 30 days. Let's talk through it. Let's process it. If it feels good, then we'll move forward. And it'll be a big cut in pay. I realize that, but foolishness sometimes comes with wisdom.
Yeah.
And so I wound up joining that staff. And then he said, what are you interested in? Because I had no idea what you do. And I said, well, I really like small groups. He said, okay, we're going to send you around the country. You're going to go to churches that do small groups. You're going to come back and help us do small groups. So I went to Chuck Swindoll's church. There was a church in Portland, Oregon, New Hope Church. And I had some mystical experiences along that line too. But anyway, that's how I got at that church. And
wow. Wow. Isn't it lovely just to roll in spirit?
oh, it is. It is. When we are, well, the elevator speech I have about shame is, to the degree we internalize disgrace, to that degree we have difficulty internalizing grace.
Yes.
It can be a good idea. I can teach it and preach it, but I don't necessarily have it from an internal's point of view.
Yes.
And that's my hope and dream for people, is to begin to internalize grace.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Okay. So I want to stop there because it's such a good stop, but I have other questions. Is that okay?
That's fine. I got time.
Okay.
I got time.
So let me just look at my notes. Blah, blah, blah. We've covered a bunch of things. I love this cunning distinction. That's a really good one. What is your current take on the mystic, the rolling with spirit, and also then there's so much intellectual cognitive in the Christian space, in the human space? What do you notice about this?
Well, I think the mystics have kept the story alive across the years. I think the institutional church has tried to control, manipulate through cognitive processes. A young man, I was talking to him maybe 4 or 5 years ago, very smart young man, very intuitive and mystic young man. And I was talking about how do we make some of the story of the Gospels credible in the 21st century to young people who have no background, and thinking it was his age, and so he must be doing that. And he gave me a metaphor. He said, Jesus says, don't put new wine in old wineskins. So what did we do? We shoved new wine into a Jewish model of liturgy and worship.
Mm-hmm.
And then we shoved all that into a political Constantinian model.
Yeah.
And the wineskins are bursting.
Yeah.
And I thought, that really says it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love intellectual things. I love thinking about things, and I love, cognitive stuff. But a mentor of mine is a kind of a bibliography mentor. I don't know him personally, but I've read his books. He made the statement, all theories are wrong, which is kind of an in-your-face kind of a statement.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why they call them theories.
Mm-hmm.
And theology are theories.
Yes. Yes.
It's theories.
Yeah.
So there are lots of different theories, and they're interesting. But unless there's an embodied element in spirituality, it's just, and I'll use a crass term, it's mental masturbation.
Yes. Yes. Another thing my partner likes to say is the map is not the territory.
Yeah.
Right. It's just, we know this. Like,
right.
I'm apartment hunting. Like, no matter who I talk to or what pictures I look like, I have to go there. I have to look at it. I have to smell it. I have to feel it.
Right.
I just have to.
Yes.
Because I cannot fully get it from a picture.
Yeah.
Or words. Yeah.
Well, I think my generation, I think we're very satisfied in some ways with an intellectual spirituality. I think the rituals with it were meaningful. They kept it going. The rituals now have lost meaning for many people. They don't have any background to it. When rituals lose meaning, they just die, they disappear. I think people are hungry for an experiential, embodied spirituality. That's not the old-fashioned, charismatic kind of over the top stuff, but
Yeah.
it's a deepening experience, experiential piece, not a light, fluffy one,
Right.
but a deep knowing of call it intuition, embodied knowing.
Yeah.
I want to know who I am. I want to know why I'm here. I want to know what am I doing in my life.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
one of my great concerns these days is I see so many young people who don't have a sense of purpose, and they tend to substitute experiences, short-term experiences, for purpose.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be in a relationship with you as long as I get something from it. When it doesn't give me anything, I'm out of here. I'm going someplace else.
Yeah. Yeah. So that leads me to my next question, I think, because I see that as in terms of soul evolution. I see that in terms of where we are and what we need for our next step. And I believe you had mentioned to me when we first met integral spirituality and integral Christianity, which are kind of two different questions. So I'm just going to throw that over there. See what you have to say.
Yeah. I've read a lot of integral Ken Wilber's stuff. Ken Wilber's book on spirituality is excellent.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with Paul Smith?
Only a little. When you sent me the thing, I looked at that Christian integral group.
Yeah. Paul stays within Christian terminology, but most Christians wouldn't recognize it. Mm-hmm. It's a mystical approach to spirituality. And he blends the integral in very, very unique ways, very special ways. I've worked with integral. I prefer the original integral rather than Wilber's model. Wilber's model is a little too cut and dry for me, but we are all on an evolutionary path, and we're either open to it or closed to it, and
and it doesn't matter.
And the fascinating thing is that we can be at different levels and in different areas of our life at the same time. Mm-hmm. I have an acquaintance who was a very wealthy man who really funded a large church. He was kind of the primary funder. And he was a scientist, and he was very successful with his scientific business. If I name the name, everybody would know the name. So he's very progressive. But the pastor wanted to make a change in the way the church identified itself. And he said, if you do that, I'll withdraw all my funding. So he was so very conservative in one area of his life, while in the other area of his life, he was dependent on anything that was new, he was into it. It was amazing to me that we can be so different in different areas of our life. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I suspect the integral has also helped me to have a lot of tolerance for people, knowing that that's kind of where that's their lens, that's the lens with they see life.
Yes.
We have in Kansas the joy of having Fred Phelps and his church issue in Topeka, Kansas for now a lot of years.
Lucky you.
Yeah, lucky us. And wasn't long ago, and what's been a year or so ago, somebody was complaining about Fred Phelps and their whole thing. And I said, well, look, they really believe what a lot of the people we know believe, but don't have the daring to take it out to the extremes. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people we know believe exactly the same thing.
Yes.
They just don't have the courage. And I don't think that evil, I use evil, can be dealt with until it's exposed. When it's seen for what it is, there'll be some changes. Until it's hidden, as long as it's hidden secretly, there's not much change.
Yeah, so it's kind of good. It's like it's taking what's been in the dark, putting it in the light, and saying, "Oh my gosh, I don't like this."
Not that that has any bearing on today's racism or political theories today, or yeah.
Or it does.
I think a lot is being exposed that's been
Yeah,
hidden for a long time.
yeah, yeah, and
And
that's the good
that's
part.
how light can get into it.
Yeah, yeah. Everything's a mirror. Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. So, all right, about leadership. Like you've come back to it a few times, but is there anything specific you want to say, or your own experience? What is leadership like, and what is it? How does it operate?
Well, I managed an office for a long time, and so I had that experience. These days, I don't manage an office. I'm a lot of volunteers. I mean, obviously, um, I think that the key for leadership, in part, is doing your own work. A leader who hasn't done their own work is going to run into problems.
Mm-hmm.
I talked in the blog or in the Facebook post about that in leadership or relationships, you have to develop an ability to have dialogue. If you don't have dialogue, you will have debate or discussions, but you'll be avoiding the real issues.
Yeah.
And to have dialogue, you have to have a sense of safety, both parties. If one party doesn't feel safe, there's no dialogue.
Yeah.
To have safety, you have to have two components primarily. You have to have a sense, a perception of mutual respect. And I use the word perception because we can perceive disrespect when it's not intended.
Yes. Back to shame.
Back to shame. We all hear through our woundedness, and it distorts our hearing.
Yeah.
And it's challenging because, well, I tell a story about my wife and I. My wife, when I came from very different families, sometimes we would go to her family and we'd come back and they said, well, what she would say, wasn't that a great argument today? That was a big argument. Said, what argument? I never heard any. Well, they argued quietly. My family, we argued. If we argued, we argued loud. And so we would be driving down the road, having a conversation. I'd be talking and I use my hands and she'd stop talking. I say, what's the matter? She said, you were shouting at me. I said, no, I was, she said, well, you were pointing. I said, well, I was pointing down the road. I wasn't pointing. That's pointing.
Oh my.
It became not safe for her. So she shut up.
Yeah. It's so subtle.
When safety goes out, when somebody shuts up, or when somebody has to get the last word in. Suddenly it's not safe.
Yeah.
And you can keep talking, but it's a waste of time. You got to go back and restore mutual respect.
Yes.
Second component is mutual purpose. If either party perceives that there's a hidden agenda, it's not going to be safe. A man you may know, a writer you may know, William Paul Young. You know that name?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Paul's a friend of ours. He tells a story. He was wounded as a child and had entered adult life with a lot of heart wound. The first time his wife left to visit family, she came back and she said, Paul, did you miss me? And he said, I have just told God I was not going to lie, fudge. I was just going to tell the truth. And he said, honey, I didn't miss you because I don't think I have a misser, which was probably true at that time. Then she looked at a basket of clothes, which he probably was trying to wash before he got home. And she made the observation, Paul, there are colors and whites in the basket. Observation. He heard an evaluation. I'm married to somebody is so stupid they can't even wash clothes right. Well, guess what he responded to? Then she responded, and
yep.
So our heart wounds often take observations and turn them into personal evaluations.
Yeah.
And that ruins dialogue. It absolutely ruins dialogue.
Yeah.
And in work settings, there are times where people, you have a staff member and you're training them to do something. And sometimes you may deliver it with a written form, or you may deliver it in verbal form, or you may deliver it by showing them how to do it. And then you realize that they're not doing it. And the motivation teams tends to be, oh, they don't want to do it. They're lazy.
Right.
The reality is they may be so ashamed to say to you, I don't know how to do this. I read it, but it doesn't make sense till I see it.
Yeah.
I saw it, but I need something written.
Yes.
And their shame is, I don't want to tell the boss I don't know how to do that. And the boss, out of their own stuff, thinks it's just laziness.
Right.
And so there's conflict when there's really no dialogue about what's really going on.
Yes. It's very, very common. It's
Very
so
common.
Yeah.
Very common. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the other piece is we're finding today we're developing a leadership component to our organization.
Great.
Leaders who have been in my age and a little younger don't really understand empathy. They don't understand empathy. They're go-getters. They're let's get it done. They are the end justifies the means. They are let's pay them more money. They'll work harder. And young people these days are not as motivated by money as we were. Mm-hmm. They want an environment where there's a sense of empathy, where they're seen as real people. They're not seen as cogs in a machine. And leaders get that. Good leaders get that, but they don't know how to do it because they've been in their head so much and not in their heart. Mm-hmm. And so we take people through a process of helping them get in touch with their heart connection.
Nice. Back to the heart connection.
Yeah. There's a story about the title of the seminar, or the ministry heart connection. When we started, I had another name, and I was trademarked by somebody else. We didn't know that, and so we had to find a new name. And I was mind vegging in front of the TV one evening. I was watching PBS, which is a great mind vegging program or television channel. And there was a heart story, a heart program on. And under a microscope, there were two different cells, two different hearts, and each of them had a pulse. And they were moving close together, and the one edge touched the other, and all of a sudden they started bouncing wildly. And then they both stopped at the same time.
Wow.
And there was no voiceover. There was no dialogue. It was like death. But then they started being with the same beat. Where before they had individual beats, then this wild thing, and then this, yeah. And my frame is, it's the point of touching, the vulnerable point of touching. That's the scary part. And we focus on how can we help people to be vulnerable enough and authentic enough to touch each other's hearts.
Oh, perfect. Perfect. So needed. So central to ourselves, to our world, for leadership. Yes.
Yeah.
It's awesome. So, Paul, how can people find out more about you and your work?
Well, Heart Connection is spelled funny. HeartConnexion.org is the core component. I'm on Facebook at Dr. Paul at Fitzgerald. I'm also on Facebook as Grace Connexion, GraceConnexion. I'll soon have a website up for that.
Nice.
Where I drop things I'm working on, spirituality. I just blog a lot there, try to blog a lot. The other is I'm launching a new website called Focusing Connection, spelled with the X again, because I believe that focusing is, it has been for me such an incredible tool to help people have the skills to find their own inner voice and pay attention to what's going on inside. I never want to create codependency. It's not about, come to Dr. Paul and he'll take you through. I'm happy to do that.
Right.
But I really want to equip people to develop their own sense of resilience. So many of us lose resilience and we start borrowing resilience from other people, their spouses, jobs, degrees, and they'll all fail us. And until we have our own resilience to come back and be adequate resources for ourselves, the trauma of our past is going to continue to affect us.
Mm-hmm.
And years ago, I ran into a doctor, counselor, minister. It was an interesting combination in Australia. And the title of the video was Gospel and Mental Health. And his point was that the gospel, as it's preached in so many spiritual communities, basically winds up creating neurotics.
Yeah.
Or dependencies. Same thing.
Yeah.
And I want to equip people to find their own internal spirituality and resources.
Yes.
The processes I do.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, Wendy.
Thank you. It's wonderful. We have a lot of overlap in what we care about and what we're working on, so it makes sense.
Yeah, I sense that.
Amazing. I'm very blessed by hearing how you put things together and the work that you've been doing. Insight. Thank you for sharing so much wisdom.
There's one more location I might suggest people, if they're interested in this focusing piece.
Yeah.
I have a free, no-cost online course called Growing Bigger Than What's Provoking You.
Ah!
It's at heartconnection.thinkific, THINKIFIC.com.
Nice.
At the end of that, there's five videos, 5 steps. And at the end of that, I invite people to connect with me, and I offer them a free 1-hour focusing session. So,
oh my goodness, so generous. Thank you. Thank you. I'm really glad to have this. I'll put this stuff not just in here in the video, but also in the information on when we post it on Facebook.
It's a privilege.
All right. So anything that you haven't said that you want to say?
I think I've said more than I know. So
yes. And from my perspective, soul leadership, it starts and ends with who we're being. And your beingness is such a joy. You're just so lovely to be with. I really believe that's the resonance that we share. That's the most important thing. And it's just really an honor to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. We'll get to know more each other a little more, I'm sure.
Yes.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Okay.